Good evening. Scott Morrison is promising to be a fair-go Prime Minister after defeating Peter Dutton for the Liberal leadership. Due to be sworn in shortly, the former Treasurer and his deputy, Victoria's Josh Frydenberg, have declared themselves a new generation ready to heal the party's wounds. Political editor Chris Uhlmann begins our coverage.
Australia, this is your new Prime Minister. Scott Morrison, the country's 30th.
There's a few more here than usual, Josh.
The 5th in 5 years.
There's been a lot of talk this week about whose side people are on in this building. And what Josh and I are here to tell you, as the new generation of Liberal leadership, is we're on your side.
And offer the hope that he can rebuild a shattered party.
Which has been bruised and battered this week.
It ended a morning of number crunching, crisis talks and brinkmanship. As the Prime Minister refused to budge. Holding off the party meeting until he saw a petition and the 43 names. Finally, Peter Dutton delivered the letter himself and the showdown was set for 12:20.
Have you got the numbers, Mr Dutton?
The challengers filed in. Peter Dutton with Matthias Cormann. Scott Morrison.
Sharks to beat Newcastle this weekend.
And Julie Bishop alone. And finally, a shattered Malcolm Turnbull. Flanked by loyal colleague Craig Laundy and Arthur Sinodinos, who rose from his sickbed for the history-making, career-breaking vote. The motion for a spill was close, 45-40, underlining the depth of the divisions and the number that didn't want to change. As expected, there were 3 contenders. Julie Bishop was knocked out in the first round, leaving Peter Dutton and Scott Morrison head-to-head.
The successful candidate was Scott Morrison, and he won this vote by 45 votes to 40 for Peter Dutton.
A party split down the middle, leaving Scott Morrison and new Deputy Josh Frydenberg to pick up the pieces.
How are you feeling?
My course from here is to provide absolute loyalty to Scott Morrison to make sure that we win the election and that we defeat Bill Shorten to make sure that he's never Prime Minister.
Malcolm Turnbull is gone, so too Julie Bishop as Deputy after 11 years.
Mr Abbott, are you disappointed?
Tony Abbott got his revenge, but not the man he wanted.
We've lost the Prime Minister, but there is still a government to save.
Well, good afternoon.
Malcolm Turnbull's final media conference before resigning, but not before an extraordinary shot at those who brought him down.
To imagine that a government would be rocked by this sort of disloyalty and deliberate, insurgency is the best way to describe it. Deliberate destructive action. But the people who chose, Peter Dutton and Tony Abbott and others, who chose to deliberately attack government from within, they did so because they wanted to bring the government down. They wanted to bring my Prime Ministership down, and while, the consequence is that I'm no longer PM, of course, instead of Mr Dutton being Prime Minister, we'll no doubt in due course we'll have Mr Morrison.
But in the arms of those whose loyalty is never in doubt. It was then to Government House to formally resign, leaving his successor to lay out his own roadmap.
If you have a go in this country, you'll get a go.
As the man of faith pointed to the lights that will guide him.
It's why we believe that Australians should keep more of what they earn. The best form of welfare is a job, that everyone has to play by the rules in this country. We all want to be able to make our own choices. We're an optimistic, we're a passionate, and we are an ambitious people to keep our economy strong, to keep Australians safe, to keep our country together, to not pit one group of Australians against another.
His first priority, a national crisis.
Is the drought. This is our most urgent and pressing need right now.
And to rebuild a government as the nation was left wondering what this day was all about. Chris Uhlmann, 9 News.
A short time ago, Scott Morrison was driven to Government House in Canberra, where he'll meet with Governor-General Sir Peter Cosgrove to be formally sworn in as Australia's 30th Prime Minister. He'll be the 5th person to become PM in 11 years. Malcolm Turnbull visited Yarralumla earlier today to officially resign from his position. He forged his name managing the budget and stopping the boats, but who is Scott Morrison? Damien Ryan says he's a Sydney dad who holds dear his family, faith and favourite rugby league team.
The son of a policeman who defeated a former cop to become Australia's 30th Prime Minister. And in Scott Morrison's electoral backyard, Cronulla, there were celebrations.
We're so excited. I hope he remembers where he comes from.
And sighs.
I'd like a Prime Minister to last 4 years. It would be nice. It's all it's going to do is cost us lots of money.
Before today, he was the #1 ticket holder for the Cronulla Sharks. When they won the premiership in 2016, he was the chief cheerleader.
The Shire will be going off.
Now he's the #1 ticket holder for the entire nation.
A few years ago, we hadn't won a football premiership. We've never had a Prime Minister, and now we've got both.
Scott Morrison is a man of faith and family, a regular churchgoer. He married school sweetheart Jenny at 21. They have 2 girls, Abigail and Lily. His political career began in 2007, taking over the seat of Cook in Sydney's Sutherland Shire from a Liberal Party elder statesman.
He'll make a great Prime Minister. He's a very smart, compassionate, likeable guy.
By 2013, Morrison was Immigration Minister and declared war on people smugglers.
We're going to stop the boats.
In 2014, a change of gear. The Minister for Social Services, including childcare, giving him a chance to bust out his best dad moves. In 2017, he became Treasurer in the Turnbull government.
It's good news.
But there was a softer side, shedding tears when promoting the NDIS in front of his disabled brother-in-law.
It's not Flash being disabled.
The business world today welcomed his appointment.
Now's the time really to get on with it and get on with the business of reform.
Along the way to the top, Morrison has had some high-profile run-ins.
There's a Bible there. Do you want to put your right hand on it and swear on that Bible?
I'm not going to use my faith for a stunt for your program.
That was 3 years ago, and it's clear Morrison and broadcaster Ray Hadley have never kissed and made up. This was yesterday.
It'll be a bleak day in Australia if Scott Morrison's named Prime Minister, I can tell you that. A bleak day.
Well, there's now a new forecast, and Prime Minister Morrison is well aware there could be storm clouds ahead. Damien Ryan, 9 News.
Good evening and welcome to a special edition of 7 News on a historic and dramatic day in our nation's capital. Tonight we have a new Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who's about to be sworn in by the Governor-General. Earlier today, Mr Morrison defeated challengers from Peter Dutton and Julie Bishop inside the Liberal Party room. This despite Mr Dutton and his Conservative faction forcing the issue before the gamble backfired spectacularly. First to our political editor Mark Riley on how the day unfolded.
Emerging from the leadership spill, the Liberal Party convinced itself it had to have the victor,
I'll have it to say a little later on,
the vanquished, and the villains.
Congratulations to Scott Morrison and to Josh Frydenberg.
We've lost the Prime Minister, but there is still a government to save.
Scott Morrison becomes Australia's 30th Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Party. Josh Frydenberg, his deputy.
Congratulations.
After a spectacle Australians have become all too familiar with. MPs filing in one by one, others in pairs into the Liberal Party room. Beside Malcolm Turnbull, a very sick Arthur Sinodinos, who flew in to be part of the vote.
Afternoon.
Events forced by an extraordinary morning. Mr Turnbull demanding to see, then verify the 43 names on a petition to force the meeting. Warren Ench, the final signature. He signed it for Brendan Nelson, setting off a familiar corridor death march towards Australia's 7th Prime Minister in 11 years. The motion for a spill tight, 45-40, the first proof Peter Dutton's claim of majority support was bogus. Malcolm Turnbull standing down. From a field of 3, Julie Bishop was knocked out in the first round, leaving Scott Morrison victorious over Peter Dutton, 45-40.
The insurgents were not rewarded by electing Mr Dutton.
Mr Turnbull left Government House for the last time, losing the Prime Ministership, but not his positivity.
It may surprise you on a day like this, but I remain very optimistic and positive about our nation's future.
But not about Mr Dutton and his supporters, he now accused of mounting an insurgency.
Insofar as there has been chaos this week, it has been created by the wreckers.
Thanking voters for their support.
I think many Australians will just be shaking their head in disbelief as what's been done.
And praising his successor.
Scott Morrison, a very loyal and effective treasurer.
Liberal MPs now calling for unity.
Enough is enough. Stop focusing on ourselves and start focusing on the Australian people.
Mr Morrison has won. I will wholeheartedly support him as Prime Minister.
The new Prime Minister promising a renewed sense of hope.
My plan for this country is for an even stronger Australia.
Scott Morrison's biggest challenge, though, is to remain Prime Minister for more than just a number of weeks. Malcolm Turnbull standing down forces a by-election that, if lost, could trigger a general election that the new Morrison government would most likely lose.
I don't think anybody should be making any plans for any elections anytime soon.
Or so he hopes, reaching out directly to voters.
They're on your side. That's what matters.
Scott Morrison lauding his predecessor.
He's a great Australian who's contributed a great deal to this country.
And accepting the need to unify, something none of his predecessors have achieved.
Ensure that we not only bring our party back together, which has been bruised and battered this week.
And from here on, it's about the Australian people.
Bill Shorten paying tribute to Malcolm Turnbull. Anyone who listened to him speak could always hear his deep and profound love for his wife Lucy and for their children and grandchildren. Today, on open display,
and Lucy.
His final moments in the Prime Ministerial courtyard. After serving the country, Malcolm Turnbull will go back to serving those he loves the most.
Thank you all.
His family.
Come on, Jack. Come on, Jack.
Mark Ray, 7 News.
So just who is Scott Morrison, the 30th Prime Minister of Australia? Political correspondent Tim Lester attempts to fill in the blanks.
In Parliament for 11 years, Scott Morrison, 50, devout Christian, former Immigration Minister. As Treasurer, he claimed a record 400,000 new jobs last year. As Tourism Chief, he gave Australia the line,
"So where the bloody hell are you?"
Today, in Scott Morrison's Sydney seat of Cook, voters were asking, what the hell happened?
Scott Morrison's not going to save them. Great local member. I've always felt he's about the most grounded.
Very approachable.
He's the new Prime Minister of Australia.
When today...
ScoMo, as other ministers know him, can take a hard line. He built up the Abbott government's border protection system and infamously refused to tell the public about intercepted refugee vessels.
We're not going to go into the micro detail. It's an operational matter.
The Banking Royal Commission, with all the shocking deceit and corruption exposed, would never have happened if left to Scott Morrison. He voted against it 26 times.
We have, I would argue, one of the best regulated banking and financial system in the world.
The new PM has also had checkered political success. He was second choice for pre-selection, seen as a strong asset for then Prime Minister Howard, but was a key strategist as the New South Wales Liberals lost in 2007. Now, it's hard to imagine a tougher job for a new leader. Tony Abbott and Peter Dutton, enemies within. The Liberal Party in disarray, bruised and divided. There's a big shortfall in campaign funds, some pre-selections not done. And yet Prime Minister Morrison could be in an election campaign in October. There was a very public falling out with broadcaster Ray Hadley, now a known Peter Dutton supporter.
And I don't see what my faith's got to do with it, Ray.
In his maiden speech, Scott Morrison quoted from the Bible, "I am the Lord who exercises loving kindness, justice and righteousness." His colleagues are waiting tonight to see what frontbench roles that kindness delivers. Tim Lester, 7 News.
And our political editor Mark Riley joins us now. Mark, it's a tough job for the government to win back the hearts and minds of angry voters.
Oh, it sure is. For Scott Morrison, it's an almost impossible task. Mitch, the only thing the coalition seems to have learnt from Labor's leadership chaos is how to repeat it. And we know how that ended in a thumping election loss. It's hard to see how this will end any differently. But of the three candidates today, Scott Morrison perhaps offers the most hope. Neither the most conservative nor the most moderate candidate won. Mr Morrison is the compromise, who at least has some chance of restoring a hint of unity. Not that the early signs are promising, mind you. Behind the scenes, I can tell you some of the insurgents are already plotting their new leader's demise. They'll stop at nothing to seize back control of the Liberal Party from the moderates. The new PM is reaching out to Peter Dutton, asking him to remain on the front bench. But how he handles Tony Abbott is another story. Does he bring him in from the cold or send him deeper into Siberia? The Morrison-Frydenberg era has begun. The big question now, though, is just how long will it last? Mitch?